Are you ready?
Let's go.
Now circling in the neutral zone.
Here's the pitch on the way. 36 yards for the win.
This.
Here comes a big chance. The shot
is
this the dagger?
The neutral zone.
This is as good as it gets.
The Neutral Zone is brought to you by the Ontario Para Network. Follow them online at onpara.ca.
Now, here's your host, two-time Paralympian, Brock Richardson.
What's going on? It's time for another edition of The Neutral Zone. I am your host, Brock Richardson. Coming up on today's program, we're excited to be joined by Katie Mitchell, who is a registered physiotherapist, certified athletic therapist, and she is the lead therapist for the Canadian Women's Para Ice Hockey Program. Plus, we're going to talk a little bit about the challenges that may exist in the coming media world, and we're going to dissect the World Junior Hockey Championship because we're all oh so happy about what happened with Team Canada, but we'll get into that in a little bit. I'm joined by Josh and Cam. Here come your headlines.
Neutral Zone headlines.
Professional women's soccer is coming to Denver in 2026. Denver will be home to the National Women's Soccer League's 16th franchise after submitting the first payment of the expansion fee on Tuesday, according to a Sportico report. The same report lists the total expansion fee at $110 million, making it the largest expansion fee in women's sports. Congratulations, City of Denver.
We also congratulate Team USA for winning the 2025 World Junior Hockey Championship. This is the second time in as many years that they have won the championship, and that is the first time in its history that they've won back-to-back championships, which is crazy to believe with all of their success and their teams over the course of the years. Canada has finished fifth for the second straight World Junior Hockey Championship as they were defeated 4-3 by the Czechs.
Latvia, who for the first time ever had 2 overtime victories against Canada and Germany, respectively. During the tournament, goaltender Leonards Feldbergs made 226 saves, while the team only had 110 shots. That is a minus 110 shot differential in the tournament.
Those are your headlines for this week. If you want to get a hold of us on social, here's how you can do that.
And welcome back to the Neutral Zone broadcast booth.
Play ball!
We're set to get this bowl game underway. The first pitch is brought to you by Brock Richardson's X account at Neutral Zone BR. First pitch and a strike. Hey gang, why not strike up a chat with Claire Buchanan from the Neutral Zone? Find her on X at Neutral Zone CB. There's a swing of the chopper out to second base, right at Claire as she picks up the ball, throws it over to the first base for a routine play.
Out!
And fans, there's nothing routine about connecting with Cam and Josh from the Neutral Zone at Neutral Zone Cam J and at J Watson 200. And the Neutral Zone is brought to you by the Ontario Para Network. Connect with them at ON Para Network. Follow them online at onpara.ca. Now that's a winning combination.
We are pleased to be joined by Katie Mitchell, who is a clinician scientist at the University of Toronto and registered physiotherapist, certified athletic therapist, and lead therapist for the National Women's Para Ice Hockey Program. Katie, thanks so much for joining us. We greatly appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Brock. It's always a pleasure to be on the Neutral Zone.
Yes, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and it's always good to get some new information in the world of physiotherapy, particularly concussions, but we'll get there soon enough. So you are you're a lot of things, to be perfectly honest. You're a registered physiotherapist, and you're a certified athletic therapist, and you're part of the Canadian Women's Para Ice Hockey Program with their lead therapist. Out of all of those things, can you give our audience a little bit of an idea of how long it takes to get all that put together?
I always kind of joke that I probably have too many hats. I don't always juggle them very well. But certainly I have been in like the academic setting for quite a long time now. First kind of with the professional pathway of becoming a practitioner, pursuing primarily athletic therapy for my interest of working in sport, which stemmed from my undergraduate degree where I was working with youth sports in the late kind of 2000s, not to age me that much, but I was just always so interested in working in sport. And I very quickly got introduced into parasport, I think as early as 2013 while I was in school. I was at Queen's and they hosted the Ontario Parasport Games in Kingston while I was a student there. So I was always seeking opportunities to work for different sports. And so they offered that opportunity to volunteer for that. And so that was really my first kind of foray, I guess, into parasport with wheelchair rugby, actually. And so that was a really fun event to work that. And then from there, I covered, I think, a club para hockey game. It was Kingston and Ottawa, I want to say, later that December, and just from a colleague who I worked with at the game. So it's kind of I think in that sense, if you seek opportunities as you're going through school, as many years as that may take, pursuing a master's degree or postgraduate degrees, really seeking those kind of external opportunities is how sort of led me to my roles in parasport today. It's a lot of who you know in the space because it is so small that often once you kind of get in, more and more people you get to meet and network with. So that's been really awesome over the last decade or so.
Yeah. And I recognize what I'm doing in this next question, and I'm asking you to possibly pick one of your favorite children in essence, but is there a favorite avenue, whether it's the physiotherapy, the athletic therapy, or working with the women's program that you like most? And if so, can you explain why?
Well, I think really it's funny you say it's like working with the kids, because nowadays some of the athletes could be the age of my kids. And so I think working with the women's team really allows me to sort of reach into both of those roles because in my physical therapy training, I had a lot more training with sort of neurological conditions like spinal cord injury or different conditions that athletes have, like lower limb amputation, other things, and arthritic conditions. So that really combines, my skills from athletic therapy, working with more active and sport populations, and bridging those things together. So I actually think it's more of I've created this sort of hybrid between the two that have really sort of blossomed into my role with the women's national team. So I think I value components of each.
Yeah, it's really interesting how sort of one kind of blends into another, and you find out opportunities through one, through another, and so on and so forth. I mean, for us, the reason we got connected, and this is your second interview, albeit through a bit of a different avenue, but same episode. This is your second appearance on our program because of our co-host, Claire Buchanan, who is part of the women's program. And we brought you on because of, Tua Tagovailoa having concussions, and it's like, should he be playing? And that's, again, a question we're going to be asking further down the page. But it's interesting how you can kind of, one path leads into another, and it all kind of comes to the same road at the same time. So.
Yeah, for sure. I think like what you said there too is my actual clinical roles inspired a lot of the research, and we can get into that a little more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that light, I understand there's more research being done in parasports around concussions. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, this is a really exciting time because the last couple of years they've really started to shed light on parasports in general for injury risk prevention and management. I was at the IOC, the International Olympic Committee meeting on illness and injury prevention in sport in Monaco earlier this year. And we had, I want to say 7 symposiums that were inclusive of Paralympic sports. So that was one of the first times that there was that much representation at an IOC meeting like that. So I've really noticed these avenues opening up where people are paying more attention and stakeholders are investing more into pursuing better healthcare for one, and also just supporting rehabilitation and performance strategies so that athletes can reach the highest levels. and certainly also just for even the access to sport itself. And so right now, so my other kind of hat that I wear is I've done my PhD. And again, that was inspired by a lot of the concussions and things I saw in higher risk collision sports through my career. And sort of during that time, I started to notice how many gaps there were for para-athletes. And certainly there was really no mention at the time prior to the consensus meeting we had in 2022 in Amsterdam. Parasport had never really been mentioned before. They just kind of were grouped in. And so we just sort of, worked with what we had and adapted where we could and modified things based on, our intuitive knowledge with our athletes. A lot of practitioners have just sort of figured it out as they went, let's say. And now we're actually starting to create these sort of multidisciplinary research groups that are developing adaptive concussion assessment tools. So the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee has started a large project to be able to start to investigate some of the tools and figure out what we want to actually include in them, what works for athletes, and sort of address different impairment types along the way. Certainly a lot of the surveillance to date has been by sport. And so we know that within certain sports, there could be a vast amount of different classifications from, a visual impairment or an intellectual impairment or a physical impairment. So lumping that together doesn't really capture like who is getting hurt in some of those statistics. So we're hoping to get a little more, go through with a fine-tooth comb and be able to characterize better outcomes so that we understand strategies how to improve injury risk and rehab.
I feel like before this research is being done, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it sort of feels like a concussion is a concussion is a concussion. And then we kind of separate it and go, yeah, but there could be differences to concussions related on people's diversities and so on and so forth. So because of this research, what have we learned about somebody with any level of disability about a concussion related to the able-bodied community that might be different, that now because of this research we go, this is good, we've done this?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think you touched on, we like to say, one of our leaders in the concussion and parasport group, Osman Ahmed, coined the phrase diverse heterogeneity. And that's really how we describe like concussion research in parasports, is because, we look at concussion as being a really variable problem, but then we also have a really variable population within parasports. And so it really comes down to understanding the individual, and not only that, but the intersection of a lot of the different factors that also influences that individual's like lifestyle and their sport performance. We wrote a paper, there's an editorial that was just published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine through our SIPS group that I was fortunate to be an author on, that we looked at not just from a disability perspective, but we're looking at things like sex and gender, age, ethnicity, and sort of socioeconomic status. Those are all things that can be variable amongst the parasport population, because a female might be different from a male, as well as we also have, I think, a broader age category. I think in parasport, a lot of athletes can play much later than in other sports, in some cases at higher levels. So, there's a lot of things to consider if you have someone who's closer to 40 years old versus there's a younger athlete who's 16. There could be different factors there too across development. So really, we're trying to take this approach where we're understanding the individual specifically. And I think that really even translates beyond just the parasport focus. But, a lot of the concussion research to date has been with collegiate white males. So even the applicability of that to a lot of different groups really doesn't translate well. So a lot more of the work now is focusing on how we can address sort of equity across groups, because there is research, particularly in parasport with injury monitoring, with concussion specifically, that females and athletes with visual impairments reported higher incidence rates. So even determining where those, injuries occur, do they occur during training or do they occur during competitions? And if we're tracking things only at competitions, are we really capturing injury risk? Or is it, when conditions are different during training? Because, in parasports, often access to resources during training is much different sometimes than competitions at like the higher scale. So yeah, I could go on a lot about that, but there's a ton of different factors that we're continuously looking through.
Well, and I think if we look at it, almost simplistically, you could have somebody with the exact same diagnosis, which might have a slight difference. So then you can't necessarily say, oh, because you have the same disability as person A, we treated person A this way, and so therefore we're going to treat person B the same. It's not the same. So I think this research does help that in moving forward and understanding that you do really have to take it person to person basis and not so much, oh, you have this disability, so this is how we're going to treat it.
Yeah, and certainly this helps with the translation of how we teach clinicians how to manage different types of athletes as well. Like, depending on the sport, oftentimes parasport really hasn't been covered a lot in like sports medicine programs, for example. It's really governed by who's kind of in the program, I think. And we're fortunate to have such fantastic practitioners in Canada who influence kind of what the curriculums look like in certain programs right now. And, it's not just like, it's not as universal as I'd like to see it, but I think it's evolving well so that, if there's a practitioner covering, maybe it is a provincial games or a more national level games or beyond that they can come in and be like very confident in assessing different athletes with different disabilities. So, something that could be in the standard assessment tool could actually be a symptom that someone experiences regularly. For example, like someone with vision impairment might have, sensitivity to light, just naturally that's day to day for them. But that's a symptom on the questionnaire. So if they're rating, light sensitivity higher than normal, they might actually rate that clinically significant when it may not be. So same thing goes with someone who, moves differently, and we're evaluating balance control. You can't really evaluate balance for someone who has a coordination concern. So, that's just something I think is important to me, is that when we do all this work, that it actually translates to the practitioners who are going to end up in those environments.
Yeah, and I mean, I might be making a bit of a Captain Obvious, question / statement here, but it's important to be honest about your symptoms to anyone that you're talking to. But would you say it's more important to be honest about your symptoms and your diagnosis when you're in the parasport community, simply because there could be so much different from one person to another?
Yeah, for sure. Obviously encourage open communication and honesty between myself and athletes I work with. But we also do a very rigorous pre-season or pre-activity assessment, I guess, where we understand each individual athlete's sort of needs and histories. And so, when time comes for that we know which things may or may not be applicable. And I'm actually currently going through some of the standardized tools now and rating things as like how applicable they are. So as we're going through some of this research for different groups. And so like that's going to be part of how we design these tools moving forward, is that, I have experience with some things, where I skip over certain questions in the tools, or, I just know that an athlete maybe experiences headaches more often, so I don't rely on that as heavily as a, diagnostic factor. But, those pre-baseline kind of assessments, I think, are actually more important for the parasport group, so that we understand each individual very well prior to even having to assess them post-injury.
For sure. If we switch gears to the mainstream sports world for a little bit to close off this interview, we know that Guardian caps are being used in the NFL and MLB. How much more protection are these? I'm looking at the NFL based on my last question on the script that what's coming, but do they add more protection? Yes, no, or is it somewhere in between?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and obviously like a hot topic. I think even towards the beginning of this season, there was a lot of discussion around Guardian caps, and my opinions are strictly my own, and kind of evaluating the evidence that exists. There isn't a lot of research that supports the use of Guardian caps compared to just regular helmets for actually reducing any sort of impact forces to the head. So a lot of the research has been done in the NCAA, obviously, because those institutions are where the research is conducted. So it's easier to work with those groups. And, there's a lot more kind of safeguards for accessing NFL players for research. But for those studies that have been recently published, there was just no difference really in adding the Guardian cap. For me, it kind of feels like a solution that bypasses any direct systemic change of regulations to the sport or culture. And so I think those bigger things have to change, and like the training styles and perhaps like the way the perceptions of the game and things perhaps need to shift a bit. Because just, mounting something else on top of a helmet, we know that helmets don't stop concussions either, because it's the brain moving inside the cranium. It's not just the impact to the helmet. So that moves independently kind of the skull. So there's not really a way of reducing that necessarily with just by adding more equipment. Some things have looked into strengthening, the neck, and that's been more in rugby research, but I think there's a lot more to explore there. And I don't think that that's going to be a be all end all solution necessarily.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, this is my opinion here is my own, but when I first saw them, particularly in the NFL, I thought, oh, that looks good. The NFL, makes it look like, oh, look what we're doing to protect the head. And of course you need protection more than not, but I just look at it and go exactly what you just said. Isn't it the brain moving inside the head, which you can only do so much protection on? So interesting that we kind of, had this conversation. And I think it's important for people to know that, yes, sure, it's there, but I think we have to look at what impact the protection is actually having. So the Miami Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa suffered yet another concussion earlier this season. A lot of people, including his own coach, Mike McDaniels, said you should probably go and be the quarterback of your life, and yet still he finished this season playing the game and doing that. He had a hip injury, of course, which sidelined him aside from the concussion. But your thoughts just purely on the concussion and the idea that maybe he should have been the quarterback of his life versus going back and playing football.
Yeah, I find that to be a really interesting quote. I don't think I'd heard that prior. Actually, I don't watch it as closely probably to have heard that in the press conference. But yeah, like certainly even the first time where he made headlines with that initial injury, it really highlighted the severity of brain injury in the NFL with, just a visual fencing response post-injury. And now we actually see that response more commonly, and people are actually recognizing it, which is kind of scary to me. There was the other quarterback, you're going to probably have to remind me of his name, unfortunately, but I want to say he was with the Panthers that was also hit late in a play and had the similar response. And so it's not just Tua that has really exhibited those signs this season, unfortunately, but I think athlete retirement is a really complex thing. And, trying to tell an athlete, like I end up being the bearer of bad news a lot of the times, where I have to tell an athlete, like their day is over, their game's over, potentially the next couple of weeks are going to be off. Sometimes that turns into months. And so when an athlete gets an injury, it can really mess psychologically with them as well. So I think there's a lot of complex factors to consider of perspectives and, again, like how they actually kind of condition these athletes and the attitudes and perceptions around the sport, I think is the culture thing. So that's a tricky one. If it was me personally saying it, I would probably lean against the same thing and advise that, maybe it would be best. And we understand that there is a risk of subsequent musculoskeletal injury after concussion, which is still kind of vaguely understood. And we're exploring why those things happen, but it's not surprising to me that he did sustain a subsequent injury upon returning to play. There's a lot of different mechanisms that could explain, in a game that comes down to inches and seconds, that, you could make an error or a poor judgment and, get tackled in a way that maybe you could have avoided and get hurt. So lots of different factors. It's a really complex question.
When you consider too that when you play in the NFL, you get 30. It's like being in 30 to 40 car accidents in the course of a 3-hour game. When you think about it in that sense, and I look at it as a fan of the game, I'm like, am I supporting this by watching this when I've been through one major car accident, which thankfully left me much the same, maybe a little less. But when you consider 3 times that amount in the course of a 3-hour game, plus then 18 games in the season, it's a lot to go through for your body. But then I watch rugby and I think, those guys are less protected than even NFL players. So sports is a risk, and it's that's why you hear the phrase sometimes. You're playing this at your own risk. Although you hope that people are around you that are going to be able to help you and sustain and make sure that you're doing the right things. I had 1 concussion, Katie, over my career, and I don't even play a physical sport, but I was dropped in a situation that had nothing to do with sport, and it took me about 5 weeks to recover from a quote minor concussion. So I can't imagine what a major one would do to somebody. So it's interesting what you think about in sports and the risk you take on. And I think for pro sports, it has a lot to do with the money that ends up in your pocket.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Katie, thank you so much for doing this. It's greatly appreciated. And we'll have to have you on again soon when we see the results from some of that research that we talked about earlier. So thanks so much for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, of course. And thanks so much to you and the rest of the crew. I appreciate being able to share some insights today and obviously have another great conversation. So thanks again.
The Neutral Zone is sponsored by the Ontario Para Network. Their focus on the growth and development of wheelchair basketball, tennis, and rugby in Ontario.
So I usually like to discuss the World Juniors, and we talk about the fact Canada either finished first, second, third, something like that, maybe even fourth. But as we mentioned in the headlines, for the second straight year, they have finished 5th, and they were defeated at the hands of Czechia for the second straight time in the quarterfinals. They lost by a goal in the last minute, again for the second straight year. What are your overall thoughts on Canada's performance, not only in that game, but in the tournament itself? Let's start with Cameron, and we'll go straight over to Josh.
Dear, where to start?
Here we go.
It was a terrible performance by Team Canada. But I blame more so the management and the head coaching for this, because the upper management and coach did not, and the general manager, did not choose the right players to take. I have never seen a more anemic goal scoring from a Canadian team ever at the World Juniors. Like, I can't believe that they hardly got any goals. And I don't expect a 12-2 game like they used to, because yes, the world is catching up. But when you look at the junior players that were still playing for their club teams that, have a lot of points in the OHL that didn't get to, it's just asinine that they weren't on the team. And they were good defensively. And the first goalie for the first game, I didn't really like him, but the second goalie, my mind can't think of the goalie's name. He was phenomenal. Like, he kept the Canadian team in. But the head coach, what are you doing? You're not having practices before games, and you lose those games, and you're not sitting people because you say that it's a short tournament and you need the guys in there, but they're not doing anything. And I particularly hated, because I'm a Leafs fan, everybody was getting on the Leaf prospect. Oh, he's had a horrible tournament, and oh my gosh, just all these bad comments. I can't even remember them all because I'm so flustered, that he had the most points for Team Canada. And yes, he didn't play well, but he still had the most points. So, like, what in the HE double hockey sticks are you talking about? Why don't you blame the player that in the last game that they played got a 5-minute major? And don't blame the referees either, because every year Canada loves to blame the referees. Oh, this isn't the NHL and this isn't how the game should be played. Well, they've been reffing this way for flipping 30 years. So you better get used to it and you better adapt. And yeah, and like I said before, the head coach, it's just unbelievable that he didn't have any practices, and he blamed it on, oh, it's the fatigue and blah, blah, blah. The freaking tournament is in Ottawa, your home country. You didn't even fly maybe an hour. You're not flying flipping overseas. There's no reason. Have a practice. Oh, I'm done. Team pissed me off.
Clearly. I think the goaltending does need to be given their due. I'm not sure if the name you were thinking of is Carter George, but
that's exactly who it was. Thanks.
He was the goalie for most of the games. And overall, I thought he did very well. He certainly started strong. But when you have 13 goals in 5 games, and when you have 34 minor penalties and 113 penalty minutes in a tournament that only lasts 5 games, that's your problem. You're not adapting to the situation. I love, quote unquote, Canadian hockey. Hard hitting, fast skating, hard shots. Love it. But that does not belong in this tournament. It just doesn't. The refereeing is different. It's not bad. It's not good. It's just different. And Canada has a history of not adjusting. And it's incredibly frustrating. There are those who will argue that the 5-minute kneeing major that Cameron spoke about shouldn't have been called that way. And that's fine. You're allowed to have a difference of opinion on that. But this is an international tournament under international rules. And in the referee's mind, that was worth a 5-minute major. How the one later in the game was not, based on that precedent, I don't understand. But it's not my job to understand. What occurred here is mind-blowing for sure. I agree with you that the people that needed to be on this team were not. I've heard that some players were not named to the team because of reasons to do with their junior clubs, whether it be disciplinary reasons or what have you. I can't substantiate that because I don't know, but that's what I've heard. And it's a shame because if there's one thing we showed at this tournament, it's that we did not have the scoring power, as Cameron mentioned. And I don't know what the average age of the players was, but in previous tournaments, I've seen us go with older players who are nearing the end of their junior career. And I think there's more maturity there. I believe that there was a lack of maturity on this team and potentially a lack of accountability. And I think you put all those things together, and that's why you have a 5th place finish. And I agree with Cameron that the players should not bear a lot of the blame. They do have to bear some of the blame because they didn't play well. Mm-hmm. But if you want to place blame anywhere, place it on Dave Cameron and place it on the management of this particular squad, the people that put this squad together. Because if you really want to win this tournament, it's sad to say, but maybe you overlook some things in terms of personality. And you say, well, he's on the team because he's a good scorer, or he's a good defender, or he's a good goalie. Is he a great person? Maybe not. But you might have to overlook. It's just very, very sad to see this team perform the way it did and to see these players be treated the way some of them have been treated, because they're kids at the end of the day. We have to remind ourselves that these are 16 to 20-year-old kids.
And the 8 penalties they took in one game, that was asinine too. Didn't like that.
Of course.
Thank you for bringing up the penalties.
Well, I mean, they were a story in the tournament. You have to have discipline in a tournament like this.
Yeah,
because the referees don't care where you're from.
Canadian management, they cared about some of the players, because I heard rumors that maybe, I think it was maybe because they weren't under Team Canada U18 or something like that. That's why they didn't choose some of the players to be on the team too. And it's like, oh, it just makes me so angry, because you should be taking the best players in order to be able to win and not holding any grudges or whatever. Anyways, go ahead, bro.
I'm glad to know that someone else's passion is much like mine with this tournament. And Josh, I'm not saying that you're not passionate about this tournament.
I'm passionate. I'm just measured.
Yeah, but like, I just want to paint you a picture of what happened in my house at the end of the quarterfinal. I sat still for about 20 minutes and just watched the screen, but didn't really watch the screen. I just was kind of blank, and I turned around because I had, full disclosure, I had a pre-recorded interview to do the next day, so I wanted to be sure that I had everything straightened away. And so I turned around, and my wife hasn't said a word to me. Nothing. Usually she'll say, "Oh, did Canada do A, B?" Nothing. She said nothing. And I turned around, and I turned around, and I went to the office, and she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Mm-hmm." And I kept rolling down the hallway. She did not say anything to me until I talked about something, whether it be regarding the game or anything. Like, I get so sad and so dejected because I expect this team to win a medal. I'm not going to be those Canadians who say, "Oh, it's got to be first, it's got to be just win a medal. Just play 7 games like you're supposed to. Don't play 5, play 7." Like, that's what I expect. And you only played 5. How dare you? That's just what I look at. The other thing that I often said to people when I was doing my own postmortem of this tournament, hence the name of the episode this week, Postmortem, because that's what we're doing right now. But I said these kids were showing their teenager, and everybody said, "But they are teenagers." And I said, yes, but this year they were showing their teenager. And you know, the moment that I realized the game against Czechia was not going to go our way was when we were skating down, and the Czechia player pushed one of ours, and he didn't push back. And then we got a penalty, and then the next play, we tripped somebody on the face-off, and I'm going, oh my God, I just finished sending somebody a text saying we were disciplined, and it's like, oh, never mind, our teenagers are showing again. So there is that. I'll tell you that I have something that I saw from Dave Cameron that just makes me want to puke. And I shared it in our group, and I'll share it here again. But he was asked on some media outlet, he said, "Do you have any regrets?" And he answered, "Nope," and moved on. Now, do I know whether that's in jest or what? No, it was in writing, so I have no idea. But the fact that you literally said nope and continued on, of like, what? You have to have regret. Like,
you lost to Latvia, for God's sakes. Of course there should be frickin' regrets.
Yeah, I mean it's I had a question here, and I think I know the answer. And Josh, you're the only one that didn't really weigh in on this one. Cameron sort of said it on his own. But you don't think that the world is getting closer to Canada, do you? Like, this was a case of Canada just showed their teenagers, and That's it.
Yes and no. I agree with you that Canada showed its maturity or lack thereof, first and foremost. But yes, I do believe with Cameron that the world is catching up. I think we see it in all kinds of sports, whether it be, men's hockey, women's hockey, para hockey. The world is getting better. And in this particular tournament, I think the world is getting better because when you sat and watched any of those games, how many times did you hear so-and-so captain for Latvia plays for X team in the CHL? More and more international players are coming to the CHL and the USHL to play North American style hockey. And so gone are the days when the Sedins played where we can go in and just bully people with our toughness. They play against it every day in their leagues. So they're used to it now. They know how to get around it. They know how to take advantage of it. So the world is catching up. And it's now on Canada to follow basically what has happened with the US and figure out a way to play better. And maybe that's maturity. Maybe that's higher skill. Maybe that's, I don't know what. I would tell you, I would take Carter George as my goalie any day because he played well. He deserved better than he got. Same with the kid that came in the Latvia game that they probably put in there because they figured, well, we're going to win this one in a cakewalk. So yeah, let's get the backup. And he's only 17,
so
exactly. He was only 17. Yeah. So what better game to put him in than one where you're expected to roll over the team? And then, oh, gee, you didn't roll over the team. Don't think that was the 17-year-old goalie's fault. I didn't see any goals he allowed that were particularly bad goals. So this, in my mind, was a team construction problem, and it was a maturity problem. And okay, on to the next. I will tell you that once Canada was out in that quarterfinal, I could care less about the rest of that tournament. I only watched the overtime of the gold medal game because they went to overtime. And the minute the Americans scored that goal, I shut it off. Because you say in the headlines, congratulations, Team USA. No thanks. I have no desire to congratulate them. They congratulate themselves.
Yeah, and Brock, he ended up doing a thing for me where he got me to do about Latvia, and he knows how pissed off I am with Latvia, so that's why he probably gave me that. But you'll notice, Mr. Brock, that I didn't say congratulations or good job or whatever. I just said Latvia. So didn't say because I'm not congratulating Latvia. I don't care.
It's not a congratulations when you have a minus 110 goal differential. That's not a congratulations. But I thought it was something cool to kind of put out there that
yeah, and you gave it to me. Thanks.
I know. You're welcome. We're gonna move off the World Juniors because I want to get to another topic that's been kind of lingering for us for a couple of weeks, but. I will tell you that there is a team and a nation that we should feel worse for than we do Team Canada, and that is the Swedes. And I'm going to give you a couple of very sort of scary statistics. They had a streak of 59 wins in round-robin play, which spanned something like over 10, 12 years, something like that. And they have one medal to show for that. They again this year had a perfect round robin. They got knocked out in the semifinal by the Finns, who then ultimately went on to play the United States, who gave them a competitive game. So there is a nation that feels worse than Canada because over 47 years, they have one gold medal. They have a whole bunch of silvers, a whole bunch of bronze, but these are teams that were built to win. These are teams that were built to do good. They over the course of the time, they had a lot of really good players and only one gold medal to show for it. And that gold medal was in Canada a number of years ago when they won it. I think it was around 2015, 2016, something like that, when they won. And so there are nations, Cameron, that have a worse record than Canada, even though it feels worse because this is our tournament and we should win on home soil. But I digress. Comment, please.
So basically, we know where the European Leafs are in Sweden, because the Leafs always seem to go out the first round. So looks like Sweden's doing the same thing for the World Junior Championships. So it's unfortunate, and I thought Sweden would have won more, and I was surprised when I saw that. But Sweden, I thought, was a good team, but apparently their roster construction needs a little bit of work too.
Or they just ran up against some juggernauts over that list of years. But
that's a lot of years to keep losing to juggernauts.
Oh, it sure is. It sure is.
Anything more on the World Juniors, or can we move on?
Just that I would tell you that it looks like Sweden's gold medal was 2012. But other than that, I'm good.
I knew it was somewhere in that neighborhood, but I didn't have anything concrete on that one, so thank you. I will also say that I have PTSD from one Dave Cameron as head coach, because I was at the championship in 2010, which was labeled the 2011, but we went there in 2010. And that was the year that Russia came back when we were leading 3-0 and they won 4-3. And I still have nightmares over that. So I don't have a lot of good to say about Dave Cameron.
You may want to see somebody about that if you're still having nightmares from 2010, buddy.
Yeah, probably.
That's the game I was screaming at my television about.
Yeah, no, and he had a lot of good talent on that team, and it didn't work.
Gee, I wonder what the common denominator is.
Him. Anyway, moving on. Recently, I was given an article by my friend, mentor, Kelly McDonald, and in this article, it talks about, as we know, recently-ish, Bell sold its shares to Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment to Rogers, and in this article, it talks about the landscape of media and the fact that less and less people are doing traditional media, television, radio. Rather, things are going more into the realm of streaming services and podcasts like this program. TSN also still has the rights to some other stuff, but they're just not going into the things that we would normally think. They're going into more sustainable investments, as they put it. Your thoughts on this idea that TSN is tinkering with the idea of selling off its rights, its sort of situation? What do you guys think? Josh, start with you on this one.
I think it's a sign of the times for sure. I mean, realistically, when we're sitting here in Canada in January and there are people out there who have to choose between hydro and groceries, streaming services and cable are not going to be high on their list of priorities either way. And that's just the sad state of affairs that we're in, unfortunately. But more and more people are looking, I think, at cable and saying to themselves, why am I going to pay $100 a month or whatever it is for cable? And I'm going to have the channels that I want, but then I'm going to have a whole bunch of garbage that I don't want, when I can just have these 2 or 3 streaming services and the rest I'll just find here and there on the internet. Why am I going to pay all this money to a cable provider when they're not providing me with what I want? So I think that's the biggest part of all of this. I'm not really surprised to see TSN divesting, quite frankly, because they're being outbid, presumably, by the streaming services and by Rogers. Rogers Sportsnet is presumably winning the rights to these things. And so at some point you have to just say, okay, I'm out. I'm not paying billions of dollars for sports rights.
Yeah, like with the last deal that Sportsnet did, it was for 12 years, but it was like $5 billion. And that's billion with a B as in Bob. That's a lot of money. And I know that they cut a lot of people at Sportsnet because they weren't making money on that deal. And a lot of that, unfortunately, is because the Leafs don't go past the first round because their ratings rely on the Leafs going deep. And I'm sorry, but that's what it shows when you look at the statistics. Prime Video on Monday, like the Leafs, whoever they're playing, the viewers, they blow all of the other games out of the water that are on Prime on Monday nights. So unfortunately, the Leafs rule when it comes to TV. And TSN, they had some regional games last year. Who knows what they're going to do this year, but they are diversifying themselves, and they seem to be getting out of the sports media, or not sports media, but at least live games. They seem to be getting out of that. And you can blame them. It's getting ridiculous, the prices, and trying to get advertising and trying to get, people to watch. And yeah, it like, I can't even fathom $5 billion. And it's coming up, is it next year, I think, is the last year of the deal for Sportsnet?
It is, yes, it is.
Like, if it was $5 billion
this year,
last
actually,
time,
like 2025.
was the end of this year.
Yeah.
So if it was $5 billion that Rogers gave 12 years ago, what's it going to be this time? Like, Are they going to be able to afford that again, knowing that they were losing their shirt for quite a while with that deal that Rogers had, because they sold some off to Prime, the Monday night games. They sold to Prime to get some money back, and cuts at Sportsnet, and, the whole different discussion as far as the radio stations and them getting cut as well for all sports radio. Like they're going to have to go a bit from Sportsnet, maybe a bit from TSN, a bit from Prime, maybe Apple, like they did with Major League Baseball. Like, I think there's going to be more choices to watch hockey on, but then you have to buy all of their flipping monthly, apps or whatever, and then you're paying like $20 a month or whatever it is here and there, and next thing you know, you're spending $100 on in different sites just so you can watch the hockey games. Like, it's insane.
What they're gonna have to do, quite plainly, is they're gonna have to do like Rogers Ignite or something there similar, where you do see Prime Monday Night Hockey and you can get that through your Rogers, but you still have to pay that extra money. What you're going to have to see happen is you're going to have to bundle it all together, where you're going to have to say you can have Netflix, you can have Amazon Prime, you can have all the streaming services for a price, but it's going to have to be a bundle, because you guys are both right in what you're saying, in that there's too many pieces of the pie here that's going to be, and everyone's looking going, I don't even know where to turn. Like, I mean, even... And I say this from a personal point of view, even insurance is going up ridiculously, where you're like, what am I doing here? I can't afford $45 more a month, which equates to a little more than $450 over the course of the year. Like, that's a lot of money. And so it's not just sports media that is the challenge, but it's everything that's going up, and somebody has to just say, what's happening here, and where does it stop? The other point that I want to make, and Cameron, I'll get your comment on this. Do you think, because you kind of opened it up here, do you think that the rights since 2013 has been the demise of TSN? Because to me, that's what it feels like. Your thoughts on if that's where the beginning of the end of TSN has sort of been, on to 12 years ago now?
Well, they were outbid by Sportsnet because they said, okay, this is going to be $5 billion, we're out. And they made a great choice by doing that. because they ended up getting regional rights for the Leafs, for Winnipeg, Vancouver. Like they got all the a bunch of regional games, and I think they're making a killing off of that. So I think they did it the right way, and they didn't end up having to spend $5 billion in order to be able to have that. So I think what TSN did was very targeted, and it's worked out well for them. I haven't seen any statistics on whether it's gone well or not, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if they've made money off of that.
Especially the Leafs' rights and all this. I think that's
that's a gold mine. Whether they suck or whether they're sucking in the first round, but great in the regular season.
Josh, do you think that's where they kind of began and end, or do you have sort of another lane that you think?
I do think that the price of rights is what has had an effect on everything. And I think you're even going to see Rogers have issue this time with the rights, because I think these streaming services like Amazon and like what's the other ones? I mean, Netflix, not so much. They didn't really get into sports, but Apple for sure. I think Apple and Prime. Amazon,
and Netflix did do the NFL that one game at least.
Yeah, they did.
On Christmas Day.
I don't really think that. I think that was them dipping their toe, and why not dip your toe into something everyone loves?
Everyone else is playing
realistically,
in the sandbox, so why not them?
Yeah. But realistically, I mean, if you're going to dip your toe into the idea of streaming live sports, the NFL is the way to go, because the NFL prints its own money practically. They're so popular. So having said that, I do think you'll see a situation where Rogers will become your MLB, your NHL, like your major sports network. Whereas I think you're going to see TSN get into more of maybe where CBC was for a while, where they show some of the more nuanced sports, if you will, the MLS and the Champions League, and maybe they get into darts and try to draw in the European crowd, or maybe they...
I draw the line at darts, Josh. No way.
Well, I don't know. It's pretty entertaining, apparently. See, my line, and I think Brock knows this. My line is tag. When I saw tag being advertised as a sport, I was like, nope, I'm out.
Yeah, it's pretty cool though. I try to sell you on this, but it's
it's not going to work.
Yeah,
tag is not a sport.
If we can sit and watch poker for hours and hours on end.
God, I'm not going to watch poker either.
I don't watch poker either.
Yeah. You're on your own there, Brock, if you watch poker.
The only thing that's entertaining about poker is listening to the players banter back and forth with each other. Otherwise, the game is confusing and boring. But no, I do think you're going to see TSN get into more of the Olympic sports, if you will, more of the track and field stuff, more of the smaller leagues. Maybe they get into junior hockey instead of NHL hockey. It's hard to say. But I do agree with your point, Brock, that cable companies are going to have to find a way to package this so that you have access. Because I, for one, refuse to sign up for Netflix and Prime and Apple TV and Crave and Paramount Plus and God knows what else, just so I can watch my sports. Sorry, Rogers, you make enough money, figure it out. Give it to me. You give me Disney Plus and I didn't ask for it, so find a way to give me what my sports are going to be on. Right
now, the Super Sports Pack's on free preview for Rogers, which I recently cut that because of expense that it's too expensive to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it is expensive because I thought, I'm going to just do internet and then watch sports on the internet or whatever the case is.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's like, okay, to Prime, Sportsnet came. So it's like $19.99, so $20 a month. And then TSN came. Well, I better get TSN. So that's another $20 because I first did Sportsnet because of hockey.
Yep.
But then I'm like, well, I'm starting to really get into the NFL, so I better get TSN. So that's another $20 a month. Well, then TSN, they only cover a couple of games, and especially like getting down to the wire, like to the 18th game or whatever, I'm like, no, I want more variety. So I get DAZN. And they had a promotion where it's like $15 for the first month, but then it's like $34 per month after that. So I've got to make sure I cancel it after I get off the air. So I only have to pay the $15 because I wanted to see all those games up to the 18th week. So, but that was like another $15, or it would have been another 30 some odd. I'm not saving any more money by not having cable when I start adding all that crap up. Like,
Yeah,
not at all.
For the NFL, especially now, it's really good that you have, or you can get CTV in some form, because they will carry every playoff game, whether it's the regular CTV or CTV2. Yes, they're carried on their conventional stations, but CTV has the rights for here in Canada, and so you can literally sit there all day beginning this Saturday and just sit there on CTV, and it goes one after the other, which I really, really appreciate. I don't know how also we get away with here in Canada the prime games on the NFL without using Prime. Like, you can watch the Prime games through the channel that carries it here in Canada. I don't get it because the NHL doesn't do that. I think you better take advantage of it while you can, because eventually Prime in Canada is going to say, no, tell your people to buy Prime, and that's where that goes, because the NHL does not afford you that same flexibility either.
well, even with I can't get CTV because I have everything like on the internet. I can't get NFL on CTV. So if I had regular cable, I could, but I don't. I chose to go the internet way because I thought I was being smart. And now that I kind of like the NFL, Cam's not so smart. So that's why I ended up having to get DAZN, because then I can watch any flipping game I want to whenever it's on. I just pick a game and watch it. So, but I'm restricting myself again. I'm not going to be spending any more money on DAZN until next year. And go from there. But just ridiculous. Thought I was coming ahead, and I'm probably further behind. My math's not good, and I choose not to math it out.
There's one more avenue during this conversation that I want to sort of discuss, and it's the fact that it doesn't necessarily stop where we've been chatting. We know that former sports host of Primetime Sports, Bob McCowan, was let go from Rogers a number of years ago, and since that point, both their television and radio ratings and programming, specifically on the radio, has been god awful. And I was listening to a podcast that Bob did shortly after his stroke, and he said he was forced out of Rogers, and he was told that Rogers made free and clear $5 million a year of revenue off of primetime sports. So Bob in this podcast was very, very clear in saying they made a mistake, they cut me a check, and that's what they did. Overdrive still seems to be the big enchilada on TSN. A lot of people still catch that. It's a younger audience that gets them, but Sportsnet has just had an awful time with its radio shows and television shows that are radio shows. Like, it's a mess. So is there room still for radio shows on television? Start with Cameron on this one.
Radio shows on television?
Like, you know how you could tune in to primetime sports?
Yeah, and watch on the
that's what I mean.
Sportsnet 360. Yeah, no, I still think there's a place for it. You just need the right host to get ears to listen to you. Bob McCown was it for years and years. Then on TSN, they ended up doing the O-Dog and Noodles and Brian, and that worked out for them. And then they ended up taking listeners away from Sportsnet to the Fan 590. So it'll come around again, I'm sure, where there'll be a show on Sportsnet radio that it'll be gangbusters for people listening to it, and then they'll put it on, the TV in order to try to get more money out of it. So I don't know. I think it just comes in cycles.
Yeah, I think the problem Sportsnet had was that they had primetime sports, but then they also had, at the time, Sid Seixeiro and Tim McAuliffe doing their show, and that was geared towards a younger quote-unquote audience. And I think the two clashed because the two were basically the same show, essentially. And now you don't have Tim doing that show anymore. You don't have Bob doing his show anymore. What you have is Nick Kyprios, who most people under a certain age won't even realize was a hockey player, and Justin Bourne, who even fewer people will realize was a hockey player. And they have a producer on that show who also has basically turned into a third host. And I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but
Sam McKee,
that's it. And I don't know what it is, but he grates me the wrong way.
Oh, Sam does? Oh.
Yeah. I'm sure he's a nice guy. I really am, but there's just, he's the hot take guy. And I have no time for hot takes. Like, have some nuance, have some opinion have some fact behind your opinion, essentially. But nothing has been the same as primetime sports. And I don't think anything will be, unfortunately.
Yeah, but is that just three old guys talking and saying, oh, well, this was the best? And like something else is going to end up happening where the younger folk are going to like something, and it's going to be the new and exciting shiny disco ball.
TikTok.
Sure, everything is cyclical. It will come back around. I have no doubt of that. But will it come back when we're listening to it, or will it be like my nephew's kids who say, hey, there's this neat thing where they sit around on TV and they talk about sports? I'm like, oh, yeah, we had that when we were kids. Yeah. So will it come back around? Eventually it will. But I just think it's gotten stale. And the people that they've tried to replace Bob with just unfortunately haven't been up to snuff. Now, I think that type of a program will exist on radio in particular, so long as you have people driving cars and being stuck in rush hour.
Yeah,
that's what radio is designed for, is for people stuck in cars on long trips.
But then now they're just turning on podcasts.
That's true.
Is what they're doing, or Sirius XM or whatever it is. They're just turning on podcasts now.
Podcast. We appreciate you if you're driving.
Yes, exactly.
I ended up liking, like after Leaf games, JD Bunkus and Sam McKee come on and they do a little on YouTube. And I enjoy listening to those guys kind of talking about the game and stuff like that. I enjoy that. So that's one podcast when I'm trying to go to sleep, listening to that. I don't mind it. By the facial expressions you two have, you don't like it, but that's okay.
I was just going to say, JD Bunkus is another one that I do not really have time for. Again, he's not my cup of tea. And you know what? I'm glad you like him. That's great.
I like that podcast.
Fair.
Because they're talking about the Leafs and what happened in the game.
That is fair. But I tried to listen to JD as a morning host, and I've tried to listen to him in different iterations on Sportsnet radio, and I can't do it. There's something about him. Again, same as Sam. I'm sure they're nice guys, but they're just, where's the substance?
As per usual lately.
I'm over 40, so.
I'm not. But anyway,
yeah, you're the young buck
you're the young guy.
The group here.
And I'm the old guy. Yeah, I get it.
As per usual with this podcast, we're over time. But I have one sort of statement, and then I have a question. So the statement is, when Sid Seixeiro left for Breakfast Television, which apparently is still a very successful television morning show in Toronto, if you're listening to us outside of Toronto. But when he left, I thought, where are you going? Like, when, like you're the thing. Like, you and Tim are the thing now. Like, Bob's gone doing a podcast, which is no longer a thing because Bob, sadly had the stroke, and there were some other things and all that. But now I'm starting to realize, guys, maybe Sid saw the writing on the wall before the ink on the wall was dry. Comment on that from both of you. And then also, did they make a mistake at the time of letting go of Bob? I know that everybody has a shelf life, I get it. But at the time they let go of Bob, did they make a mistake? So 2 comments from you guys. 1, Sid Seixeiro, did he get out before it was dry? And 2, did they make a mistake on Bob? Start with Cameron on this one.
They did not make a mistake with Bob because they had Tim and Sid. And they thought if they moved Tim and Sid to that timeline and get the younger viewers, that would blow up. Problem with that is they ended up turning the radio show into a TV show. And there's a lot more production costs when it comes to a TV show. If they ended up just being in the studio doing the radio, like they did from when they were on from 2 to 6 or 2 to 4 or whatever it was before Bob, that might have worked. But they ended up putting it into a full-blown TV show and putting it on the radio. So they put a TV show on the radio, not a radio show on the TV, and that's a huge difference. So I think it ended up costing too much money. Because they didn't get the viewership or they didn't get the advertising money for that to go. And I think, Sid realized it. But if you believe him at the time, he also said that basically he was just tired of just doing just sports. And he wanted to venture out and he wanted to talk about other things as well, not just sports. So things a little bit from column A, a little bit from column B.
Yeah, Sid was the part of Tim and Sid that I didn't enjoy. What a surprise. Again, hot takes. The hot take guy.
Shocker,
I know. So, I mean, did he get out when the getting was good? Probably. He strikes me as a very smart man. I didn't like the way he would fly off the handle. That was my thing with him. Having said that, I don't think anything was going to replace Bob McCowan. I don't think it was possible. He had far too big a following and was far too popular at the time. So I think anything you put after that, and especially if you tried to put a younger version of that in that time slot, I think you were probably destined to failure on that. So Sid probably did get out when the getting was good. It's getting late in the day. What was your other question?
You answered both of them. You're good. I actually had to, when I watched the Bob McCowan podcast that he did, and I can't remember the title of the podcast, but he really made me think about why he left. And so after that, conveniently, it was the end of his last show. And so I watched it, and I have a totally different take now when I watch it the second time around rather than when I did the first time. When I watched it the first time and Bob ended by saying, "My butt hurts, I'm out, I'm done, good night from Toronto," put down his glasses, did that whole thing, I thought, okay, he's been doing it for a long time. He's making a joke about the fact that his butt hurts. He's been sick, whatever. And then I listened to the podcast and I went, oh no, he's actually ass hurt about what Rogers did to him. And that's a real point because he made it very clear that, yeah, I got out. They gave me a good check. I didn't say I was done. They did. As for Sid, I think Sid knew a little bit, but I also think Sid realized this is a better opportunity here at Breakfast Television. And I don't want to be pigeonholed as just the sports guy. I want to do something outside of that. They've taken away things on breakfast television like the 60 Seconds with Sid talking about sports, and I think that's been done by design. I think Sid is now branched away from sports. He'll still weigh in on the World Juniors. He'll still weigh in on when the Leafs lose in round 1, whatever. But the focus is no longer I'm the sports guy, and I think that was done by design. And so the media world is in a different state today than it was 10, 15 years ago when I was growing up. And I think it's going to change yet again, but the networks have to be very careful with how many subscriptions they offer, because money is not getting higher, it's getting lower for people in today's economy. That is the end of our program for this week. I'd like to thank Josh Watson, Cam Jenkins. I'd also like to thank our fabulous technical producer, Mark Aflalo. Stay tuned for next week, because you just never know what happens when you enter the Neutral Zone. Be safe, be well.
The Neutral Zone is brought to you by the Ontario Para Network. Connect with them at ON Para Network. Follow them online at onpara.ca. Now that's a winning combination.